Friends, happy Thursday. I hope y'all are having such a wonderful Thursday. Thank you for those of you who are joining us live. If you are joining us live, introduce yourself in the comments. Let us know where you are watching from, what grade you teach. And if you are watching the replay, go ahead and comment as well and say replay and share what grade you teach, where you're watching from, all of that. But for those of you who are here right now, we're obviously live. So Kendra said she's been waiting all day for this. We have too. Dana said, are there any third grade teachers here? We've got some from Ohio. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. If you missed last week, my name is Brittany, and I am the math brain behind Mix and Math. I like to say I used to create learning experiences for students, and now I get to create learning experiences for teachers. I absolutely love professional development. My focus is typically on building content knowledge. So this has been such a fun book study, talking more about like the classroom practices rather than really digging into the math itself, but both equally as important. And then I am joined tonight by Christy. I absolutely adore Christy. I finally got to meet Christy. Christy, how long have we known each other? Like a couple of years?
Three years probably.
Yeah, 3 years. And we officially met for the first time, in April?
Yeah, just a few months ago.
Yeah, so very fun. Although I felt like I, was meeting somebody I've known for forever. So Christy, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Christy Harper. I teach, I've been teaching 4th and 5th grade math for about 15 years in Northern California. Just this past year, my role transitioned to now I'm 50% teaching 4th grade math, 50% TK through 4th grade math specialist. And I'm at an independent school in Northern California.
Yes, your school was so lovely. I got to meet her at school and tour her school, and it was so fun. All right, Amy's here from Florida. Karen's here from Eastern North Carolina. Karen, I'd love to know where in North Carolina you are. I'm in North Carolina as well. I guess I didn't share that at the beginning, but all right, so if you did not join, if you joined us last week, you know how this is going to go. But if you did not join us last week, we are just going to dive into talking about chapters 3 and 4 of our Building Thinking Classrooms book study. We will start by sharing some of your aha moments, and then Christy and I will just go back and forth and chat about, what came up for us as we were reading chapter 3, chapter 4. Christy has been using, intentionally been using Building Thinking Classroom strategy for like the last couple years, but I know both of us have been using a lot of these strategies. Both of us typically have more of like a problem-based classroom. And so a lot of this just fit really naturally into, I can speak on what I've done that aligns with this, and she can speak on how this elevated what she was already doing as well. So, all right, let's start off by sharing some of your aha moments. Let's see. Okay, so Sarah, she said that what really stuck out to her was the marker thing, making sure that all group members have the chance to use the marker and the tips that the book gave to ensure that that happens. Absolutely brilliant and so easy to implement. Yes, that is interesting. That is something different than, what I did. Everybody had a marker, and I'm like, okay, that one little tip totally could elevate things. Tara said, I am a type A teacher. Reading chapter 4 made me realize my love for straight lines, symmetry, and organization is most likely prohibiting my students from getting messy and taking risks with their math thinking. I would love to know, Christy, from you, and then also from everybody in the comments, how did you feel when you read the whole thing, the whole part about, how our perfect classrooms may be prohibiting thinking? Christy, are you like a neat freak? Does that bother you, or were you cool with that?
I actually was so thrilled when I read that because I'm like a type B teacher. And so my school departmentalizes. I taught only math, but my co-teacher teaches humanities. And she is very like perfect classroom, like Pinterest worthy. And I always felt a little bit like, oh gosh, like, cause I was not keeping my stuff like super organized. I mean, I'm very organized in like my, like keeping my curriculum organized and that sort of thing. But my room is not the neatest, and my desks were never like perfectly aligned. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that like, that's actually a good thing. Cause I always felt like you hear, okay, we need less visual distractions for kids with ADHD or for kids with, focus issues. And I thought, okay, maybe what I'm doing is harming them, but there's such a good balance, I think, that he described between just the message that it sends, that it's okay to be a little bit messy in your thinking because it's a little bit messy in the room. Not messy per se, like you have
Right.
trash on the ground or anything with that, but this whole idea that it's not going to be like this perfect like rows with kids all facing one direction, the very like old school way of envisioning a classroom. So I actually felt really, really
I was going to say, okay, I have to share this. So Karen said knife through the heart. That's how she felt when she read it. What's funny is I am not an organized person either. My husband and I taught in classrooms next door to each other. I was math and science. He was language arts and social studies. And he would come in at the end of every day and clean up my classroom for me because I was just, so for me, I'm like, oh, that was wonderful. But yes, I can tell. We had somebody else comment and she was like, I'm going to have to like test this out because this is really hard for me to believe. But I get it. Have you ever walked into somebody's home and it's so pristine that you were like afraid to do anything?
Exactly.
It made me realize I was like, oh, there may be students who feel that way in classrooms. So loved that reflection point from, what was it, Tara? And then Carrie said, my aha moments, thinking is messy. It really is. And reading that confirmed my belief that to get them thinking, they have to be moving. It reminded me of the analogy I shared last week. Does anybody remember the analogy I shared about the front and back of math being like the front of a restaurant and the back? We want our classrooms to be like the back of the restaurant. Secondly, to continue and to foster thinking, I need to make sure the furniture is arranged in a way that promotes thinking, not direct instruction, sitting, all period thinking. Love that reflection. Judy said the power of vertical whiteboards. I know from this is why I chose this one because I love this. She said, I know for myself, I suffer from anchor chart envy because I feel the pressure of making it perfect and pretty. I've always had a class of whiteboards for students. Now I can look back and see how their engagement was higher when they were doing activities there versus their notebooks. So I love that. And I'm the exact same way. I'm the person who gets a brand new notebook and like am paralyzed to even write in it because I don't want to mess things up. I was the same way with anchor charts. I honestly rarely used anchor charts because it stressed me out.
Blank page syndrome, I think they call it.
Say that again.
Blank page syndrome. Like you see a blank page and you're like paralyzed to do anything because you don't want to start wrong.
Yeah.
It's totally true.
Yep. Okay, last aha moment here. Crystal said she's been teaching for 14 years and never thought about the message the arrangement of furniture portrays to students. I always thought that students would be more productive in an organized classroom with less distractions. I'm excited to lay out my classroom this year with a whole new perspective. And if anything, I love, one of my favorite things about this book is the fact that it's just getting all of us to think about all of the things that maybe we have never thought about. I can't remember if I said this last week. There's a quote. It's like, we question all of our beliefs except for the ones that we like, except for our deepest beliefs and the ones we never think to question or something like that. And it's like, these are the things, like some of the practices we have in our classrooms, like we never even think to question, like, oh, like this is how desks are arranged. We never thought to say like, how does this impact learnings?
It's so deeply ingrained. Yeah, no, I think that was a huge aha for me and for a lot of people is this implicit messaging that the furniture arrangement gives to students, like what it says to students and about what they're expected to do in the classroom and what the teacher's expectation of them is. That I thought was super interesting is that he talked about, and when he used those direct quotes from students, like a lot of them were about what they thought the teacher thought they wanted from them or what they thought the teacher was going to, how they thought the teacher wanted the students to behave. It wasn't so much about them. And so I love this whole idea of like, it's not about the teacher at all. It's about you. This is your classroom and this is your safe space to like do thinking and to be mathematicians and to get messy in your, maybe physically messy in terms of like the way that you're writing down your thinking, but then also like messy in your thinking. Like it's not a linear path to get to the answer. And that's not the point, is to get to the answer. Like I really like that whole idea that, it's not about what the teacher wants. And so much of it, I think, I mean, and I'm guessing because I'm like, I became a teacher because I'm a control freak. Like I just said, I'm not type A, but I am totally a control freak. And you feel like you lose a little bit of control, I think, when you're defronting the room or when you're desks are not really lined up, because a lot of it has to do with classroom management, right? It's so much easier to keep kids' attention and to keep kids from getting distracted and to keep kids from chatting if they are facing forward and not towards each other, and they're in these kind of, rows that are single desk, and not necessarily grouped together. And so you have to give up a little of that, and just like take that leap of faith. And that was for me one of the scariest parts of starting to integrate some of this into my classroom was, I didn't want to lose some of that like classroom management control, because I think that's, for a lot of teachers, that's what it feels like. It's like it's like there's this fine line that you have to walk between letting the class slip into like unproductive chaos and productive, or like controlled chaos. Somebody just said in the chat, like, you have to be comfortable with that. And I was already like, that was already like sort of my philosophy. So that resonated with me, but to give up a little bit of that even more was like kind of hard with the furniture arrangement.
Yeah. It makes me think about like raising toddlers, which I'm in the thick of right now. We have to create, like boundaries or like bumpers. And like within these boundaries, there is that, that freedom. And, I think somebody may have commented last week about, I can't remember what the specific comment was, but my thinking in response to the comment was essentially like, we have to establish norms. We have to make it a safe space. Some students are not used to collaborating this much or having these discussions. And I think it's our job. And what I really appreciate from Joel Bowler, if anybody, let me know in the comments if you've ever done Week of Inspirational Math. I really feel like she kind of set some foundation. Obviously, the author of this book, Peter, he was working on this stuff for like 15 years. But I don't know when Week of Inspirational Math came out, like maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah,
more than that. I don't know. But in a lot of that, though, it's very much this thinking is messy. Like math is going to look different than what you're used to, but let's establish these norms. Like this is how we talk to each other and keep our math environment like a safe space. And so I think we can have that chaos, but we also have to teach students, or maybe like show students or prepare them for like the boundaries, like what's okay, what's not okay in the classroom. So I don't know if that fully made sense. It made sense in my head before it came out.
And I think that's one of the major themes of this book is about creating this culture of that's what's expected here, is that you're thinking, and this culture of being safe to think. And like that, I think if you were to like ask Peter Liljedahl or any of these researchers, Joe Bowler, Julie Dixon, any of them, like none of this works. Like somebody said in the comments, like none of this just by itself gets kids to think. Like it has to be in conjunction with a lot of things. And one of the major foundational things, you cannot build on a shaky foundation. So like the foundational thing to be able to build a classroom like this, that is a thinking classroom, is this culture of this idea that the answer is not the destination is not the destination. Right. It's the process that is the destination. Like that's what we value. We don't value the answer. We value the thinking, and we value what you are talking about and what you are, what you've tried and didn't work just as much as what you tried that did work. Like, so I think that's something that you have to establish like straight from the get-go. And I think the Week of Inspirational Math, like that's something that's so, so helpful that a lot of people do at the beginning of the year. And then I think the problem with that is you do that at the beginning of the year, and then you're like, okay, now I'm getting into my curriculum, and you kind of leave that behind. Right. And so that was, for me, one of the hardest things was to keep on thinking like, okay, I'm going to do this at the beginning of the year. Right. We need to do these non-curricular tasks to build this culture at the beginning of the year. But then we have to keep on like following that thread even throughout as we're getting into the curriculum.
Yeah.
And so that would be, I don't know, that's something that you just have to like constantly be building up and reinforcing and working on. And it's so important.
And I think too, that if it, I would challenge anybody who is, getting to this place of like, okay, I do all this stuff the first week of school, and then it's like, oh, we kind of fall back into old habits. It's like, okay, then I would really push you to say like, okay, do you really believe it is about the journey and not the answer, or the struggle and the learning and the messiness and not the answer. Because if you're, I think what gets praised or what gets rewarded gets repeated. And so one of the questions that we were going to address at the end was like, let me just go ahead and pull it up because we're already kind of talking about it. How do I convince my students that their thinking is valued more than their final answer? It's like, well, we've got to praise that. Like, we've got to praise their thinking. We've got to highlight it. We've got to celebrate it. We've got to put more emphasis on that than the answer. And if we truly believe that that is the purpose of working through all of this, then that will be the thing that will be where our focus is. And so if we're struggling to focus on that thinking, it's like, oh, maybe we need to go back to our, like, truly our beliefs and our approach and our philosophy going into math education. Like maybe that's out of alignment with what we are telling students we believe.
No, absolutely. And I was just reading, like, somebody said in the comment that the non-curricular tasks help their students lose their fear of math. And I think that's exactly, like, if you asked me what my math philosophy is, like, or my mission as a math teacher is to have students love math, right? To help students love math. That's it, like, plain and simple. And that's how you do it, right? Is by giving them the opportunity to be successful, and not just being, and success does not mean just getting the right answer. Like, if we can redefine success as like successful struggle, successful in, doing something that's incorrect, but still like was kind of a cool strategy that we're going to remember for next time, that's still success. Or, everybody is reaching success in their own way, or, multiple different viewpoints that they're, approaching the problem with are all equally valuable and successful. Like, that's how we, I think, get to take this like anxiety away from math. And we're not going to like perpetuate this whole next generation of people who are like, oh no, oh math, oh yeah, no, I know, I don't like, I'm not good at math. Sorry, I'm going on a tangent. I'll get off my soapbox. But I hate it when I have parents come in, I have their kids sitting right there, and a parent comes in and is like, I can't help them with their math homework. No, I'm no good at math. I was like, stop saying that. Like, this is what is gonna like perpetuate the whole idea that math is fearful. It's not.
Because we would never, it's like the cool thing to say, but we would never say like, oh, reading, that's totally not my thing.
That's exactly right. I would never be like, oh, I'm a terrible reader. Like, oh, I can't read. It's like,
yeah,
that sounds so terrible.
Like, all right. I'm bringing us back in. We are going to get to these chapters, but yes. So in summary of what we were just saying, we want to establish all of this in like right from the start. In that first week of school, we're actually working on like the first 2 weeks of lesson plans for our 360 teachers. And literally every single day, it's like hitting on one of these like values of like, what do we truly believe in math and how do we get students to experience that? So, all right. So let's start with chapter 3. So if everybody wants to flip to chapter 3, if you have got your book, and we're just going to go through the different things that stood out to us and have different conversations about them. I have a mosquito in my office and I'm just like terrified it's going to come over here and bite me. So I will say like the first thing that stood out to me was the continuity of the workspace ensured a continuity of student behavior. And I really think that quote right there kind of tells us, he's talking about 3 different tasks. What was it? It was like the actual like task that they were working on. And then it was like note taking. And I forget what the other one was. Basically, they were saying like, if they're all just sitting and working in a notebook, like they are going to take that same energy in all 3 of those tasks. And that's not really what we want. And so this whole chapter really just challenged how students are working throughout different parts of the lesson when they're working on a task. And, he dives into that, the table on page 60, where he tested out the vertical whiteboard, the horizontal whiteboard, vertical paper, horizontal paper, notebook, all of that. And I will say for me, I typically spent a lot of time in the horizontal whiteboard area. Students were still standing or they were sitting on the desk, but we did a lot of horizontal whiteboard. And so, Christy, I'd love to hear from you because I know you did a lot of that. And then you've also experimented with the vertical whiteboard. And I would just love to hear how, what you're seeing Like what shifted when you moved to that vertical versus horizontal whiteboard versus working in a notebook? Because you have you use IM and that has
Mhm.
a workbook, correct?
Yeah, it's super workbook focused. And then I have whiteboard desks. Oh my gosh, I'm so lucky. I got whiteboard desks this year. I love them. They're super high maintenance, but they're great because so I do a lot of horizontal whiteboard work as well. And then of course the vertical whiteboard work. So I feel like with the vertical whiteboard work, it takes away, and this was, I think, something that was huge in the chat that I was reading in the group when people are answering their aha moments. It's like that idea of taking away the anonymity. Am I saying that right?
Mhm.
Not feeling anonymous. Like kids disengage when they feel anonymous or when they feel like they will be allowed to be anonymous.
Yeah.
And standing up and being at that vertical whiteboard, 100%, I completely noticed that in my own classroom as well, that there was so much more engagement because there's nowhere to hide. You're standing there, everybody can see everybody around the room. There's not like this back of the room where you can kind of hide or anything. Like,
Mhm.
in fact, like going into the middle of the room would be more conspicuous than just staying on the sides where your whiteboard is. And so they, in so many different ways, were way more likely to stay engaged when they were at their vertical surface. And then when they're doing their horizontal surface or they're working on their horizontal surface, I don't let them be anonymous because I'm moving around constantly. And I'm like, it's right there. I'm looking over at you. I can see whether you're drawing or whether you're actually answering the
Right.
question. Like, and I'm going to hold them accountable. And so keeping up that expectation of like, nope, even though we're, working horizontally, you're still supposed to be engaged. But it's much easier if they're working in small groups there for like one kid to be like pulled back if they're working horizontally. I for sure noticed that.
Yeah.
Um, and then in the workbooks, yeah, in the workbooks for sure. I mean, that's where I notice a lot more of the like the stalling behavior or the mimicking behavior, that sort of thing was much more prevalent when I'm looking at the workbooks. And I can't, and I also have like, I feel like I don't have as good a data about what they do in their workbooks because I can't see as easily
Right.
what everybody's doing when they're all in their individual workbooks. So that for me was my big aha moment or one of the big aha moments for chapter 3 was this whole idea of, first of all, that it's a quick formative assessment for the teacher.
Mhm.
And then also the idea of knowledge mobility and this idea that being on vertical surfaces, they can share ideas much more easily, which I'll talk about that in a second. I had to really combat against this whole idea of copying and cheating if you are
Uh-huh.
sharing ideas.
Yeah.
Um, but that for me was a huge aha moment about this idea of it makes it so that the kids are the experts and the kids are in charge of sharing the information, not the teacher,
Yeah.
right? Because that's my whole teaching philosophy is that I am not the sage on the stage. I am not the person who's going to be here to impart knowledge onto you and just transfer my knowledge from my brain into yours. I'm the facilitator, right? I'm going to facilitate you doing the thinking. Like that's what I've always felt like and how I've always tried to teach. But that was the biggest like game changer for me when they went to the vertical surfaces was this idea of like, oh, you guys don't really need me anymore. Like, unless I'm going to come and I'm going to give you an extension or this group needs a hint or they need me to come over and point at that group and say, hey, you should go talk to that group over there because they use a strategy that might be more successful or, might complement what you're doing. I was doing way more of the actual facilitation than the explanation and like all of that. So for me, that was the biggest game changer when they're on their vertical services is this knowledge mobility and this idea that like, I am not the expert in the room. I am
Right.
just here to help you guys become the experts and to help you all figure it out yourselves because you are totally capable of doing that yourselves. You don't need me to do that for you.
For sure. And that is totally in alignment with my philosophy. Like and I think in I don't know how I grew up, the teacher was like the beholder of all knowledge. Like you go to a classroom,
Mhm.
the teacher has the knowledge, they are gradually like imparting that knowledge to you. And I think the biggest thing that it was, I don't know, maybe 9 years ago, when I realized I was like, "Oh, that does them such a disservice because they never have the power of knowing that they can learn something or do something unless someone is telling them how to do it."
Mhm.
So, which is a lot of the argument against the I do, we do, you do. because what does it start with? The teacher. The teacher is giving you the knowledge, which is why I'm so in alignment with like CGI and Julie Dixon's layers of facilitation, because it's very much experience it first, and then we consolidate it, then we formalize it or synthesize or whatever word. There's so many different versions of that, but we learn and then we like just formalize that understanding. So yes, and then with the vertical surfaces, leaning on other people, like valuing, I think, the understanding and the knowledge that other groups have. So I would love to hear, you said you were going to address the whole copying thing. Do you want to touch on that?
Yeah. So it was funny because the first few times, so I taught fourth and fifth. I looped with my kids just for math. And so for the last 2 years, and no, I shouldn't say every year because I've only been really doing this for about 2 years, but both of the last 2 years, my fourth graders, the first few times they did tasks like this, they would not share ideas with each other. They didn't think they were allowed to share ideas with each other. I didn't tell them they were allowed to or not allowed to. I didn't say anything. I just kind of let them do what they were going to do. And then during one of the first few tasks, I said to a group, I said, oh, you should go talk to that group over there. They're trying a different strategy that might be more successful to you. And they're like, can we do that? I'm like, sure. Yeah, go ahead. Like, they're right there. You can talk to them. They can explain their strategy and what they're doing better than I can. Go talk to them. They went over, and then the group was like, you guys can't copy us. Like, that's not okay. And they're like, the teacher, Miss Harper, just told us that we could do this. And I came over, and they were like, they're trying to cheat off of us. And I was like, no, we're all trying to figure this out. Is this a race? No. Is there a prize for doing it first? No. So does it matter if you're sharing ideas and, hey, you guys actually had a great idea. That's why I sent them over to you. And after that, they were like, oh, okay, well, we had a good idea. Okay, cool. And they really stepped into that like teacher role of, hey, we can explain to you what we were doing.
Right.
And so from there on out, then it was like, okay, you're allowed to do this. This isn't cheating. This isn't copying. This isn't, something that's totally taboo. And then it's so funny because then I see with my fifth graders, who it's the second year that I've had them, they're like from the get-go. They're just like,
right.
And like I've had classes where they're like, we're going to do this all together. Like they don't even, and I was like, okay, is this kind of going against the small group thing if they're all working all together? I don't know. I just let it happen. And it was kind of cool. But I think we definitely need to stick to the groups of 3. It was better. But there was one task where they like fully just all shared ideas with each other. And like, I was like, okay, this is interesting. And it was fine.
Hey, were they all thinking?
Yeah. So that was the problem, I think, is that once it started getting like this giant group, then there were total opportunities for some kids to be anonymous again. So
yeah, that makes sense.
I didn't really let that happen more than once.
But I do love what you said though about, how you brought it up to the group who was like, hey, you're copying me. You presented it in a way that made it feel like made them, I think, really take pride in their work. Like, hey, y'all had a really great strategy. And so I sent them to you so they could see what you're doing, see what you're thinking. So I love that, that shift. Okay. And let's see, I was looking, somebody said, like, Christine said, I hadn't thought about all the benefits of knowledge mobility before reading this book. Absolutely. Same thing. That was a huge aha moment for me as well. One thing that I kind of going back to what you said about them working in groups around the outside of the room, in order to like check out, they would have to come to the inside of the room, which isn't anonymous. But I love what Peter said. He said, and okay, I keep referring to him as Peter because I feel like I'm going to mess up his last name. It's Liliadol.
I say Liliadol or Liljadol or yeah.
I think I was saying Liljadol, but somebody said Liliadol. And I was like, phonetically, right. Maybe that makes sense. So I just call him Peter. Hopefully that's not disrespectful. Anyway, so he wrote in the book, though, he said, it's not that students feel unsafe. They just don't feel safe to get off task. And I loved that. I was like, that to me is like such a like aha moment of, it's the cool thing essentially to be on task. Like everybody's doing it and you can see that. And to be off task puts you in kind of that, not unsafe, but kind of like unwanted territory to some extent.
Exactly.
Okay. Was there something else that really stood out to you in chapter 3?
Do you know what I also, so this was the second time I've read this book, and my aha moments the first time are totally different than my aha moments the second time. So
Okay.
this second time, my first one was about the knowledge mobility and like how that aligns with my philosophy. And then my second one was how much this way of teaching um, really teaches those like 21st century skills that we want students to understand that can be really hard to teach in math. Like I'm talking about ideas like collaboration, communication, all the C's, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
collaboration, communication, I forget
Cooperation.
cooperation, like all of those things that a lot of schools are like, we don't just teach the academics, we also teach these skills, which is arguably more important, honestly, to learn than number crunching, right? Because we have computers who can number crunch for us. We all walk around with our iPhones in our back pocket. We don't need to know how to necessarily do long division, but we do need to know how to communicate our ideas with other people, how to critically think about the ideas that other people are presenting to us, how to collaborate successfully with various different personalities, some of whom you'll get along with, some of whom you won't, right? And so that was my other aha in this chapter, was this whole idea of that you're hitting those so like beautifully and in such an intentional but also not obvious way by teaching this way, because they're having to do it in a natural way. It's not at all like a prescribed or like it's not
It's
at
not
all
a
like
lesson on like how to collaborate together.
exactly. You're not having to sit there and be like, okay, here are the roles in the group that you're going to be doing, and you're the facilitator, and you're the leader, and you're the materials manager, whatever it is. It all is very much like they're learning it through experience, which is, what you want them to learn anyways. And so that also stood out to me this time around, like this idea that, I mean, these are the skills. And this is, another one of my philosophies about teaching is that it's just as much about being able to communicate your ideas to other people
Mm-hmm.
as much as getting the answer, right? And so this idea of like explaining your thinking
Yeah.
and showing your work, like how many times have we as math teachers said, like, you need to show your work, or you need to, explain what you did here. Like I'm constantly saying it. You have to do it this way. And especially if you do that whole, I loved his idea that I had missed the first time around, but I totally am going to do from now on. Like there's the one marker for each group, and you can only write other people's ideas.
Uh-huh.
You can't write your own ideas. I love that, because then, first of all, you have to learn how to listen to what
Right.
other people are saying, and those people have to learn how to effectively communicate like their thinking to you.
Right.
So for me, that was like, okay, that's something I need to make as a tweak.
Yeah, so I loved that. I also loved, and as we were talking at the beginning about like boundaries and setting those norms, I like kind of like in that same paragraph, he talked about how we don't erase someone else's thinking.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so that is something that's like when we're talking about creating that safe space, like that's something to point out, because that shows that we value the thinking of others. So
Mhm.
yeah, the one marker thing, I was like, oh, that's something totally different than what I had been doing. Was
Mhm.
everybody had a marker, and I get the reasoning for why.
Mhm.
He says one marker. So I thought that was interesting. Um, Something else that I wrote down, let's see. I've got all my notes on this desktop over here. Um, oh, obviously with the vertical non-permanent surfaces. Now, if you're somebody who's constantly moving around the classroom, I think you are able to see where students are at. But he said that having the vertical non-permanent surfaces aids teachers in their continual formative assessment and ability to provide and solicit feedback, because you know where every student is. And that's not to say, we have had some questions, and actually we had a whole conversation about this before we started, and maybe we can dive into this a little bit about, does everything that you're doing in a math classroom need to be on a vertical non-permanent surface?
Mhm.
And one of the things that we had said is, this, if you look at the chart on 60, it's kind of like a spectrum of like what is the least effective and then what's the most effective. It's not this like binary, either you're using the vertical non-permanent surface or you're not. It's like, where are you at on the spectrum of effectiveness with the modality that you're having students work in? And so there are times that you may not have students working on a vertical surface. And so Christy, do you want to touch on that a little bit about where that fell in your classroom? Like how often were you using the vertical non-permanent surfaces and for what? And when were you not? And when did you have to make a judgment call of like, okay, in this situation, a horizontal whiteboard is going to be more effective than the vertical.
Mhm.
So do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, this year was a total, um, I was completely just figuring things out this year because, so I started using the BTC like philosophy 2 years ago. This last year, 2 years ago, mind you, I didn't have a curriculum. I was writing my own curriculum, heavily just using mix and match stuff and, stuff that I pulled together myself. This past year now, we've switched over to IM. That's when we've officially moved into following that curriculum. And I tried to follow it pretty closely so that I could really get a feel for what it was like and not change too much or, try and supplement or take away. And so I had to really think about a lot. And I went back and forth quite a bit about when to use the vertical surfaces, when to use the workbook, because it's very workbook oriented, I guess, and when to use the horizontal. And I kind of came down to a balance of, there were some days when I never used the vertical surfaces. And there were some days when I never used the workbook at all. And no day was ever exactly the same. And so typically I would use the vertical surfaces for either the warm-up time, or if there is, because IM is illustrative math. Somebody was asking about that. They're very inquiry based, and so they like to have the kids try a problem or try to figure it out before there's the actual teaching. And so I would use, oftentimes the first task that they have would be on the vertical surfaces, and then we would move back and either be in like the rug area or at their desks for the subsequent ones. And then there were some days when we were at the vertical surfaces the whole time because we were really just focused on that one task. And then there was like the follow-up task after it. And that was like the bulk of the lesson, was really digging into those tasks. And then we would kind of debrief, synthesize sort of towards the end. And oftentimes we would go back to our seats for that. I was talking about this with you before. I found times when we were using manipulatives, if it was a really manipulative heavy lesson, I was using the horizontal surfaces way more. It's just, for me, there's a proximity issue for a lot of the whiteboards and the kids' desks about being able to easily use the manipulatives on a horizontal surface and then use the whiteboard. Often what they would end up doing is like the whiteboard would be their manipulative because they would be drawing out like a picture, like they would be drawing out a picture of the base 10 blocks or a picture of the pattern blocks or a picture of whatever we were using. And so that would sometimes take the place. But then if we were using like really, I don't know, we were building like volume with volume cubes or something like that, we would be working horizontally. I don't think that there's necessarily that you have to be constantly on the vertical surface for it to be effective. I found that a mix was all it took. And often just at least having that one task at the beginning, like set the stage for thinking, like it primed the thinking enough that it was like, okay, we're in this mode now. I'm warmed up. It's like, what you do when you're warming up for a workout. And then they were in the thinking mode and I could go to horizontal and they're not going to stop thinking. Right.
Well, yes. So I have two thoughts with that. Like one, we have to get back to like, what is the purpose of this? Like, why are these recommendations in place for the vertical non-permanent surfaces? Like, what do we want to get out of this? And honestly, at the end of the day, like nothing is perfect. Everything's a give and take. Everything's like a spectrum. And so it's like, okay, what would be more beneficial for us to do the vertical surfaces, but not use any manipulatives because it's inconvenient, or doing like a horizontal whiteboard and using manipulatives? It's like, you have to make that judgment call for your classroom, your students, all of that. I would venture to say if it is a concept where, students are at a place where they need to use manipulatives, like they are developing understanding, it's like, I wouldn't be willing to say, well, to use the vertical whiteboard, I'm not going to use manipulative. So it's like either we find a way to like make those two things work, or we say, okay, we know students are still going to be engaged. The other thing I think too is, he talks a lot about like triggers for thinking. To me, if you have set things up properly at the beginning of the year, as far as students' relationships with models and manipulatives and all of that, manipulatives should be a trigger for thinking. They should be a trigger for engagement.
Mhm.
And so again, we have to go back to like, what is the purpose? To get students thinking. And yes, you lose a little bit of the knowledge mobility from like group to group, but if you're allowing students to stand up and go from, tables and look over and be like, oh, this is what you're doing, it
Mhm.
maybe makes it a little bit more challenging as far as the knowledge mobility, but it doesn't mean that knowledge mobility still can't be there. So somebody was asking, like, I missed the comment because there's been so many comments, but somebody had said something like, well, what do I do if I can't use the vertical ones? And it's like, one, I think we figure out like, okay, can we get creative? Is it possible? But if it truly is impossible, that doesn't mean that the practices in this book, like that you can't take some part of it. It's like, okay, well, can you use horizontal surfaces and still implement or set up a classroom culture where, students can go from group to group and pull ideas and things like that. So
Mhm.
I just want us to, it's not all black and white.
I love, yeah, no, Aisha, I think is her name. She just said, aha moment. Maybe the goal is to get students to apply the same thinking strategies that they use on NPVS carries over when they have to do paper and pencil. That's what I think. Yes, that is exactly what I'm trying to say. Like, I think that it's this, like you were saying, it's setting up this like expectation of thinking, and it's the trigger for thinking. You don't have to be doing that exact, non-permanent vertical surface to have that same effect still like carry over. So
Exactly. Yep,
exactly.
absolutely. It is about getting students to think and work collaboratively. And if we can do that, I mean, I think to some extent, as I was reading this, it was really interesting. And we will move on to chapter 4, I promise. But as I was reading this, like in the beginning, you know, I think we have like our own little circles of educators. But when he was talking about like the I do now you do, I was like, I have not been in a math classroom in a really long time, at least in elementary, where it's very much like the teachers like standing and it's like, I'm going to do this. Now you do this. It's like, to me, that is the extreme. And there are teachers who are still doing that and absolutely no judgment. Like if that is where
Mhm.
you're at, like I cannot wait for you to try some of these because it will revolutionize your classroom. But like, I guess a lot of the teachers like in my little circle, these practices are like small tweaks or different or mindset shifts. And so I don't even remember where I was going with all of that. I lost my train of thought.
It was
What's
with the I do, you do, or the I do, we do, you do.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
I lost it. Anyways, okay, chapter 4. Here we go. um, so actually, was there anything else that we wanted to say? Oh, I did want to point this out from chapter 3 that I thought was like, I highlighted it and circled it. He said, every class has a wide range of abilities. This is a defining
Mhm.
quality of classrooms. And that when you are doing thinking tasks, often your perception of like strong students and struggling students is incorrect because you see that these students have different strengths and weaknesses and all of that. And I just really love that because in working with teachers, I can't tell you how many times I hear, okay, but my students are grade levels behind, or my students are, whatever. And not to invalidate that because, classrooms do have a wide range, but, Peter has worked with over 15 years with probably thousands of teachers, and he says this is a defining quality of classrooms. And I think when we get to a place of accepting that this is just how it is, now it gives us like instead of the frustration or the burden, not the burden, but like the weight of like, oh my goodness, how am I going to serve this? It's just like, this is just how it is. Like I get to be, I get to figure this out. I get to problem solve. And figure out how to meet the needs of my students. Not to in any way say that is easy. It is not easy. Nobody has written a book that says, here's exactly how you meet the needs of every single student and how you get them all to the same place and all of that. But it does provide a little bit of like, okay, like we're in this together. Everybody has a classroom that looks like this to some extent.
Mhm. Yeah, I like that, and it kind of turned on its head, like this whole idea of differentiation in math. Like, it's not necessarily you're not necessarily putting them into these groups that you thought they were going to be in with like high readiness, lower readiness. I love that about, this is not chapter 3, but with the mixed groups. That was, I will say, of the like strategies that he's presented in this book, the randomized grouping has been the number one game changer in my classroom. I even got my co-teacher to do it. She does it in her humanities classroom. I got my middle school math teachers to do it. Like, so many people at my school now are doing the randomized groupings every single day. And it's been like the number one game changer. So if there's like only one thing that you can do because of whatever limitations, try that. That's my recommendation.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's pretty much every teacher that I've talked to has been like, this has been life-changing. Like, you've got to try that. I think you wrote the blog post. Maybe your blog post on the Mix and Math site was about random groupings. I think it
I
was.
think it was, yeah. I think that was my like kind of big theme.
Yeah, I think so too. So, okay, so let's jump into chapter 4. So chapter 4 was a big one for a lot of people because this caused, I mean, I know for me too, it caused us to think about the fact that like our classroom, the setup of our classrooms communicates certain things to students, like just the setup of it without even saying anything. That was like such an aha moment for me. I was like, oh, I never thought about that when I had my own classroom. What was it communicating? Like, yes, obviously with the decor and all of that, like I wanted it to be very inviting. And I had a coffee shop theme. So like our tables were like little bistro tables or whatever. So
That's awesome.
yeah, it was fun. I got them at Craigslist. My husband was not excited about me going to go pick these up, but it was so fun. But there was never that intentionality behind like, oh, this is why this worked, or this is why this didn't work with different classroom setups. So I really appreciate it. I had a lot of appreciation for this chapter and lots of aha moments. What was something that really stood out to you?
Do you know what's interesting? So something that I thought about as I was reading this chapter with the whole impact of furniture is I was thinking about all of I'm in Northern California, so I'm really close to Silicon Valley. But I thought about all of the Silicon Valley offices where people almost poked fun at these offices like Google and Facebook and stuff like that, where you walk in and they don't look like traditional offices, where you would walk in and it was like all open air and there was like bean bags to sit on instead of desks. And then there was like honestly, all of these vertical whiteboards all over the place where people would go and like meet. And I thought about that. I was like, if that's what we're going to be, if that's kind of the future of, what office work looks like shouldn't we be doing the same thing in our classrooms? And then also, were they onto something, right, at Google and all these Silicon Valley like offices that totally took down the cubicles and the desks in rows and like the separate offices and allowed for this like collaborative, free flowing, like very defronted, right? Like those whole, to use like Peter Liljedahl's words, like this defronted office. And that was what allowed these people who work at these places to be so creative and to be able to think. Like maybe they had figured that out even before like
I think they totally did.
Yeah. And I'm not saying go and get like a bunch of bean bags, but just this whole idea of like, oh yeah, like this defronted, like non-traditional like structure that's not new. This is not revolutionary. This is like something that they've been doing in these more like progressive offices for years and years. And these places that are known for being extremely creative and extremely like thinking forward places. So it totally sends a message, the way that the room is set up or the space is set up, about what's expected there and what you can do. And I think it like we were talking about these triggers for thinking, like absolutely it's a trigger for, oh, okay, I'm allowed to be creative here. I'm allowed to be not, necessarily linear in my thinking here because the space is not linear, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree with that. And I think also setting it up in a way, I've always had tables. And so it just naturally, I've never had, actually, I had my first year, I had individual desks. So every time after that, I had tables. And so there's this natural, like, okay, we're going to be doing a lot of group work. Like that is just, the setup of that. And so You have tables in your classroom, right?
So I had tables until I got my whiteboard desks. Now they're really funky. We call them koi desks because they're shaped kind of like koi fish, and they're individual desks, and they're all on wheels. And so mine are in groups of 3, but it can change easily. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see. I want to see what I liked this. He said, defront, de-straighten, desymmetrize. Is that how you say
Mhm.
that word? Symmetrize? I've actually never seen that word until I
I don't
saw
know.
it here.
I feel like that's made up. Like,
Maybe it is, because I was gonna say I've never seen that, but I'm known to make up some words.
yeah.
So let's talk about the whole defronting thing, because that is
Yeah.
where I know we've gotten lots of questions around, like, what does it look like? And y'all, I should have said this at the very beginning, but this is like, we are just having a conversation. Y'all are having conversations in the comments. If you have thoughts that you want to throw out there, we are both kind of looking at the comments and I can share on the screen. But as we talk about, defronting the classroom, if you're somebody who's already done this in your classroom, definitely share it and we can share it up on the screen. So I know for me, like one of the big things that the way my classroom was set up, like, yes, we actually had whiteboards in the, like a huge wall long whiteboard in the front and then also in the back, which was really nice because it didn't ever really feel like the front, but there was a projector on one of the whiteboards. But
Mhm.
though the year that I got those coffee tables from Craigslist were like, or the bistro tables were like some of the best things, because I think for me, it puts the, like focus inward, like in the group, and not necessarily like, oh, I'm supposed to be looking in one direction. So that was kind of, for me, somebody asked, like, how do you defront the classroom? I think it's like put the chairs in the opposite way of where the natural front of the classroom is.
That was an aha moment for me, because I think you say defront and people are like, oh my gosh, I can't defront. Like I have a projector and it has to be this direction, and like I have space issues and my class is too big. He says very clearly, hold on, I will find the page for you, but I don't have it off the top of my head. He says very clearly, like, defronting just means that your chairs are facing different compass directions. It doesn't necessarily mean that there is no front or no like projector screen or that sort of thing. It's just this whole idea of that that kids are facing different directions and that the teacher is moving around the room. That's all. If that's all you can do to defront your room, I think like that's brilliant. That's achieving the purpose, right, of defronting. And because the purpose is not necessarily to just have it be completely defronted. It's just to take away this idea of, again, going back to this idea of the teacher being the holder of all knowledge, and they stand in the front of the room. Page 75. Thank you. You're
Yeah. Oh goodness, Siri. I was not talking. Siri's trying
I
to talk.
think that was the whole point, is that it's not just this, the teacher at the front of the room at the chalkboard, like imparting the knowledge. That's the whole point of the defronting. It's not at all anything to do with like you have to have this space that is so
Yeah.
desymmetrized. It can still be, that way.
Yeah. There was something that I pulled out. Somebody asked, by the way, if I was departmentalized or if I taught all subjects. I've always been departmentalized. And Christy, you're departmentalized too, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
I'm only math. Yeah.
Yeah. But the three things that he mentioned, which I really appreciated, because again, like I said, this is not like either you're doing it or you're not, like there is a spectrum. He said there are 3 elements to disrupt here. So how tables are arranged, where
Mhm.
students are seated at the tables, and where the teacher positions themselves. And
Mhm.
so we can't go into this all or nothing mindset if all you can do is change where you position yourself and change where kids are seated at the tables, then that is disruption right there. So think about what you can do, like what you can do now, not now, like when you get back in your classroom, and what you might need to work towards. Like maybe it is like, well, eventually I need to talk to my administrator about getting tables instead of desks, or maybe I need to write a grant or whatever. And that's down the line, but you can change where you're positioned in the classroom. Maybe you can change where the seats are at the desks or at the tables. No, other way, at the desks. So I really appreciated that he broke it down into, you may be able to do some part of this and you may not be able to do others.
Mhm. And so I was telling you, Brittany, about this, that I went to a webinar. So I am hosted a webinar with Peter Lilladall 3-4 months ago, where they were talking about the crossovers and the connections between illustrative math and BTC. And his advice was, don't wait, get started. Just do what you can. Because if you wait for things to be perfect, like it's never going to be perfect. Just do what you can. And even if it's just one of these things, it's better than nothing. Like that's the whole point. Nobody wants you to be doing all of these things all of the time perfectly. Like like you said, disrupting one or two of these things is enough to make such a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. There was something else that really stood out to me in this chapter that I wrote down. It's on page 76, and it says, that we place the furniture to suit our intentions. And that it's not a one-way street. The placement of furniture also shapes the teacher's intentions. So like we place the furniture based on our intentions, and then the furniture kind of dictates how we operate and dictates our actions. And I thought that was really insightful too. Like, yes, if you have your tables set up and they're in rows facing one way, well, you really have no choice but to position yourself in front of those tables. And so I love that mindset of it's a two-way street. And if you position them in a way where, it is truly defronted, that gives you the freedom to move around and be wherever in the classroom. So I thought that was a really powerful statement.
I was thinking about, there's a couple of things that I was worried about that I've seen in the chat and I've seen in like the group that I know people are worried about. One is kids who have 504s and IEPs that say they have to be like seated in certain places. So here was my solution to that. First of all, it does depend on the wording, right? For our IEPs at my school, the wording is always something with least distracting location or something or a strategic location with least distraction. So away from windows, doors, that sort of thing. And so that was easy to get around. And then what I would do too is I would think about the purpose of having that accommodation for an IEP student is for the student, I assume, to be near the point of instruction. And so if I'm moving around while I'm instructing, I would just strategically move more towards where my student was that needed that proximity, or that needed to be having those more individualized check-ins more frequently. I would change myself based on where they were seated, because they were seated in different spots all the time. And yeah, they weren't always away from distracting things. They were sometimes by the window, sometimes by the door, whatever it was. But I could control where I was. And I would have, sometimes 2 or 3 kids who needed that in a room. But because I wasn't chained to the front of the room, I was able to make sure that they still had the purpose of the accommodation, which was to have that be near the point, the instructor, and also to have those check-ins, like those kind of both nonverbal check-ins and also verbal check-ins more frequently, because that was the point of the preferential seating, right?
Yeah.
And the other, I think, major fear, and for me, this was a major fear when we did the random groupings, was that there are some kids that you really do not want to be teamed up into the same group. And I had to get past that, and I had to let it happen. And the first time that it happened, with these 2 kids who were buddies, and the other little know-it-all kids would come to me and so-and-so and so-and-so can't be together. They can't sit next to each other. They're not allowed to be. And I'm like, we're going to try it. We're going to see what happens. And they were like, what? And I was like, yeah, we'll see what happens. And oh my God, they were awesome. They couldn't sit next to each other because they were best friends, because they were always talking. But guess what? They worked super well together because they're best friends. And so when they were allowed to talk, right? It doesn't work if they're sitting next to each other when it's supposed to be this quiet, orderly classroom. But it totally worked when they were working together and trying to work together to figure something out, because they get along really well together. And then there's the opposite, kids who get along really well together and can't be together. And then there are times at my school, usually that's not a permanent thing. So-and-so and so-and-so can never be together.
Right.
Usually it's at this time, they're having a hard time for this week. They need to not be together. So there are times then, yes, I have switched kids up, or I've as I'm sitting there passing out the cards, you see what's coming next. If you know that so-and-so just got a 2 and the person who's not supposed to be with them is about to get a 2, I would like totally draw from the bottom of the deck and then get a or whatever. Like, so there's definitely ways to get around it that you can be a little bit sneaky for the kids who cannot be together. But for those kids that you think can't be together because they're going to be distracting, give it a try.
Yeah.
First of all, they were so excited to be together that they didn't want to mess things up and they didn't want to
Exactly.
lose that privilege. And then secondly, like it actually and it often and also like if it totally sucks, it's one class. Like
Right.
they're gonna not be together. Like it was totally fine.
Yep. And I think that's a learning experience though for them. We can sit
Yeah,
back and have discussions about like, let's talk about why this didn't work, you know,
exactly.
because there are going to be situations where you're going to be working with people like that just in other classrooms in life, whatever. So it's
Mhm.
even when it doesn't work, it's a learning experience for sure.
Yeah.
Um, okay, let's move on to questions because we're already at an hour. So we'll do like 15 minutes of questions. So somebody, and I think some of these questions we touched on, we're actually not going to touch on this today. I'm actually going to save this one for next week just because I know that we will not get off here in 14 minutes if we talk about this. But I will direct you to chapter, I think it's 15, where he talks about a schedule. But y'all remind me to add this to our, I'll make a note of it, to add this to our question list for next week. With this, Amy asked about how do you include manipulatives if they're standing at a whiteboard? So we talked a little bit about this, about, sometimes you're just going to use horizontal surfaces, but I found this video. There is a Building Thinking Classrooms like Facebook group specifically that's all about building thinking classrooms. And I want to show you this video. It's going to mute us when we show the video. So I think it's like 10 seconds, but I wanted to show you this because if you are wanting to use manipulatives and also have the vertical non-permanent surface, I thought this was really cool. So let me show this to you. Okay. So I thought that was really neat because you can see how they have, at these table groups, they've got the manipulatives and students are going back and forth. When students are working with manipulatives, they should be, and this is like my bread and butter. This is what I love to talk about, but they should have some way to document their thinking. And so instead of it being like a math journal, it can become your whiteboard. So that is just one way. I hope that answers your question, Amy. Obviously, you can use the horizontal one. I still think if you want to use your math journal to some extent, when you're having students work with manipulatives, if they are thinking and they are, if you establish math journals in a way where it is messy and that's okay, it's not this like right or wrong, it has to be done this way, but there are lots of different options, even if you want to use the vertical non-permanent surface with the manipulatives. So, all right, let's look at a couple other questions. Okay, so this one was, I wonder about giving up so much wall space when teaching my other subjects. I have so many fixed cabinets in my room that the only way I can see this working is having the vertical whiteboards be movable. I can't remember when we discussed this, Christy, beforehand. You said yours are your desks, and so you could move them. Did you have any movable ones?
I did. Yeah. So before I got my whiteboard desks, because I just got those this year, I had some some of the whiteboards would be like my front whiteboard, which was my teacher whiteboard. That would become one. I had one on the other side of the room. I had one that I bought from Home Depot. I got the melamine. I hope I'm saying that right. I'll look it up. You can buy it from Home Depot. It's super cheap. And then I got like my co-teacher's husband. He just drilled it into the wall for me. Oh, well. And then my last whiteboard was a movable one. And it was just one of those that like, it's kind of, I don't know, 3 feet tall. And it just was on wheels. And it originally was like a bulletin board or a movable board. I don't know what it was for like putting signs on. And then I just put the whiteboard on top of it and like leaned it onto the little tray and that worked perfectly. And so I would wheel that out like when they were going to use it, and then I would wheel it kind of back against the wall, or it would be covering up one of my other whiteboards when it was not being used. And so, yeah, totally. That's super easy to do. And especially if you go to like Lowe's or Home Depot or wherever, and you get that whiteboard surface, it's like shower board or melon. I have to look up the word. It'll be really easy to. I just leaned it on there. I didn't even affix it like permanently.
I was gonna say, because we were talking before, and where'd my whiteboard go? These whiteboards right here, like just these ones, they come in like group size. And I was looking for the link to be able to give y'all in the Facebook group, and I'll keep looking for it. If anybody has it, y'all are welcome to share. But they have these, and it's like essentially the size, like if you put 6 of these together, it would be like that size. Before I never had dry erase tables, but it was like wet erase tables. Like you could erase them, but you had to like put some force behind it, or get a wet paper towel. And so we would just use like these massive group ones and just put them on the desk. But to make those vertical, if you do not want to have like permanent surfaces, these would be so easy, exactly like you're saying, to just get out, either like stand up against the wall, or even I was thinking, I was like, I wonder if like the heavy duty command strip. So it's just that Velcro, or we even talked about like, could you put like little like holes on each end and then put like some nails, and then not nails, but like hooks that might be like a safety hazard now that I think about it. If a kid were to like run into a hook, I don't know, maybe, but I think there's room to get creative. And so I did want to share that if you have done this and you want to share pictures in our Facebook group, like please post those pictures. Because I know that, people who are just getting started with this would love to see that inspiration.
So in the chat, yes, melamine is the stuff. Is shower board. You go into any home improvement store and you ask for shower board, they'll know what you're talking about. And then we're using magnets and the easels. That's what I couldn't think of the word, but that's what I had. It was just an easel, and then I would lean on the little shelf there where you like put where a kid would do art. I put the board there, and that totally works.
Yeah, there's all kinds of questions about like, will this work and will that work? I think the point is if it's non-permanent and it can be vertical, it is considered a vertical non-permanent surface.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. All right, let's take a look at a couple other questions. I think we talked about this. How do I convince my students that their thinking is valued more than the final answer? I think that's something that we constantly talk about. We model, we praise and reward the thinking more than we praise and reward answer getting. And then there were a couple of things here. So this is a lot of questions, but I thought we could just like hit a couple. I think it was this one, number 3, was one that I think several people were like, oh, I had that same question. So how can I still have some order that still encourages a thinking classroom, like turn-in bins, areas for materials, schedule, instructions? I think it goes back to, I'll share my thoughts, and then Christy, if you want to jump in, like, I think it goes back to, again, thinking about the purpose. It's like is having a like bookshelf that has like a turn-in bin and your like makeup work or whatever, is that going to impact students' ability to think? Mm-hmm. My thinking is no. You can have that space, and that's not saying like, oh, this is the front of the classroom or whatever. Like it's not going to impact it. And so I think we can't be so rigid in thinking that those, like anything that we previously had needs to get thrown out the window. We can still have that, but maybe not have like all of the important things sitting along one wall. And that's also the wall that you stand on to teach the entire class period as well. So Christy, what would be your response to
I still had all that. Like I still had turn-in bins, areas for work. Like I had a whole wall of like the materials that were organized in little bins and all of that. Like it was still a very organized classroom for sure. Like that's, you should keep all of that. That's going to help your classroom run smoothly. But I think what's more important is having that non-permanent vertical surface, and then like defronting, and not having it be like a institution when you walk in. Like that's more, I think, what he was saying, as he never called it bad, but as like the not to do example is very like so rigid. I still like the cute stuff. Like I still like the like color coded, like fourth grade is all green and fifth grade is all blue, and I have the makeup work and all of that. Like totally still do that. But you still want to have some of that like warmth in your room for sure, not just, chaos.
Yeah. And I think you go back to like with anything, as you're setting up your classroom, all of that, go back to, to what degree is this impacting students' ability to think? And
Exactly.
if the answer is like, not really, then go for it. Um, so there was one other question on this list. I think it was, let's see. Um,
Using the projector. I
yeah,
had an issue with my projector because my projector, of course, you can't move that. That has to be by definition the like front of the room. But
mhm,
I had to really retrain myself because I love my projector. I use it for everything. Like the agenda's on there when they walk in the room. And I also really struggled with this whole idea of, I mean, going back to kids who need these sorts of accommodations and also good practice. Like the kids need to be able to see and read the information as well as hear it. And so I really struggled. We're not quite there yet to when he's talking about like giving the tasks, but I one way that I got around that was and this is, I mean, it's using more paper, but the task would be printed on paper and then with painter's tape or whatever would be magneted onto the board so that the kids could still see it there. It's not necessarily projected on the board. So I had to really stop and think about like, does this need to be projected right now? Do we need to can this be done another way? Especially because also my projector projects onto a whiteboard and that was one of my group surfaces. And
right.
so anytime we were doing those sorts of group works, like the projector couldn't be on. And so I had to kind of rethink about what had to be on there. Like they don't need to be able to see the agenda the second they walk in the room. They
Right.
can come in and they can do the task first. And then, when we kind of reconvene, I can go over like, okay, this is what's going to happen. Of course, I'm also departmentalized. I'm not a homeroom where I mean, I guess in a homeroom, actually, it's even less important. They don't need to see the agenda all day long, or that can be on something else. Like it could be in a pocket folder, or it could be somewhere else in your wall space.
Right. Yeah. I just want to highlight a comment that Beth made. She said, I was really anxious thinking about all of this prior to the live stream. This conversation has encouraged and inspired me to try pieces of this that will work. I will focus on getting students to think. And Michelle agreed. And I just love that because it's so easy. And this is with anything, like any self-help book, professional development book. It's so easy to read it and be like, I'm so overwhelmed to do all of this. I think about this with fitness stuff a lot of times. I used to be a very much like all or nothing person. And it's like when we just think about like what steps can I take to improve? To get closer to this ideal? And so I really hope that anybody who's watching this, you're able to walk away. And I'd actually love for you to comment this. Like, what is like the one thing, if you had to choose one thing that you're going to commit to from chapter 3 or chapter 4, anything that we talked about tonight, what is that one thing you're committing to try? And I know that Peter talks about like, you really want to have this disruption and try the first three practices in the toolkit to really disrupt. And so, yes, I totally agree with that. But also I think it's really cool to say like, okay, I'm going to have this one thing, and that one thing is going to get students closer to thinking. So we have a little bit of a delay between the live stream and the comments. So go ahead, drop those things. So one thing you're committing to. Denise said defronting, vertical whiteboards. Cheryl said randomized grouping, vertical spaces. Awesome. And I would encourage you anytime you're going into any professional development or anytime you're reading a chapter. And I actually think in the workbook, I may have put that. It was like, what is your one biggest takeaway?
Mhm.
That really helps us like create change without being like so overwhelmed that we don't even know where to start. So awesome. Okay. That was a great discussion.
Yay.
And we ended like somewhat on time. I think maybe I slotted these for 75 minutes. I'm not sure. So I forgot to ask you this beforehand. Christy, is there anywhere you want people to follow you? Or Christy's going to be joining me again for another week. I'm very excited about that.
I wish that I was like with it enough to have an awesome account to follow, but I don't. I just I just post pictures of my kids. So
Well, that's okay. You can follow Christy at Mix and Math because I feel like we do things all together. Christy, back when actually what it was like you were on Team Mix and Math for a little bit, and then you were like, yeah, like having a full-time job and working for Mix and Math and having a whole family. We were like, let's take a break. But I'm telling you, like anytime you see a live, like I'm pulling Christy in there somewhere. You're actually gonna be one of the guest math coaches for the Math Experience event.
mm-hmm.
Very excited about that. So you'll get to see Christy again in 2 weeks, right? Because you're the last
July
chapter
6th.
7 and 8. I think so. Yeah. And then also again at the Math Experience, and probably, well, again, if you're in the Mix and Math 360 community, and just you'll see Christy all the time. So follow Mix and Math, and you'll also get to follow Christy until I can convince her to create like a math Instagram or something like that. In all of your free time.
I know, really.
So, awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I hope that this was helpful. Next week, we will be covering chapter 5 and chapter 6. So we are really looking forward. I forget what chapter 5 and chapter 6 is. I didn't write it down this week.
I think one of them is like the types of tasks you use, or how we answer questions in a thinking classroom is chapter 5. And then chapter 6 is when, where, and how tasks are given.
Oh, perfect. So we kind of touched on that a little bit this week. So we'll have another special guest next week that I'm very excited to introduce y'all to. But yeah, I hope y'all have such a wonderful evening, and we will talk math with you again in the Facebook group when we do all of the posts for week 3. So have a great evening.